It's been a while since we've done a good old-fashioned My Hero Academia video, so with the release of My Hero Academia Vigilantes, I was sort of feeling a little nostalgic and figured why not give the people who subscribed to me first forever ago what they originally came here for. So today we're here to talk about how many chapters My Hero Academia Vigilantes Season 1 will cover, so this video is going to contain spoilers of course as we go through the events that I think will be covered episode to episode. And obviously as they come out you can return to this video and either give it a like or a dislike based on how accurate I am. We were pretty good at doing this before, but maybe I'm rusty. So starting off, just how long is Season 1 of Vigilantes? Well, we learned last month that this season is only going to be 13 episodes long, but that actually mirrors what we saw in the first season of the main show, so I'm not too worried about that, especially with the difference in animation quality and art style that we're seeing in this show. So starting from episode 1, which some of you lucky folks have already seen, I'm expecting us to get an extended intro where we see the students from Class 1A and All Might explaining just what a vigilante is before we go back in time to the time of the series, but maybe they'll skip that and just give us some narration instead. Either way, we'll proceed to the events of Chapter 1 where Koichi comes across a strange man named Soga that attacks Popstep in an alleyway, causing Koichi to finally step up. In this episode, it's not that I'm expecting a bunch of filler material, but I do think they'll really flesh out everything we saw in the manga a bit more than usual. Eventually, Knuckle Duster is going to jump into a dumpster to save Koichi from these guys, and we'll officially have the main party assembled. But thankfully, thanks to information from people who've already seen the episode, we know that we're ending episode 1 off on a cliffhanger because Aizawa shows up and stops Knuckle Duster from harassing people walking by. Now this is a perfect place to end this first episode because of course you want to include as many familiar faces right away to hook people who are just fans of the main series into this one and have them asking questions. So with that said, that means episode 1 covers 1.5 chapters of manga material. But what can we expect for episode 2? Well, here I think it's possible that we get an episode entirely dedicated to the rest of chapter 2 because quite a bit happened. First off, of course, we have the fight between Knuckle Duster and Aizawa, which I'm expecting to be pretty awesome since you always gotta let Aizawa show off. And they gotta gas up KD since, you know, he's one of our main characters now. While this is going on, the B plot for the episode is Koichi once again dealing with Soga and his boys, now empowered by Quirk slurps. However, even after that, these guys pretty much have to all come together to fight against a giant Quirk user going rampant in the town. It's here where we'll see Koichi's first big defining moment as he races up a building and launches himself into the sky to save Popstep, which mirrors Deku saving Ochako from the giant robot and also having a major fall of his own. After Aizawa wraps the villain up and subdues him, I think we'll go all the way to the end of the chapter where these three go off into the night once more. However, personally, if it was me, I'd actually scoop up Koichi's backstory from chapter 3 into the beginning of this episode to really make that flying scene have a little more payoff and to also sort of fit the pace of the first episode. So with 2 chapters and 2 episodes covered, we move on to episode 3, and this should start off with Koichi trying to break up a fight between Wolverine and Cyclops, and I call them that because trust me, in the chapter, that's exactly what they are. But eventually, Knuckle Duster calls him over to ask about how his quirk works, wondering why Koichi isn't faster than he is. Koichi tells him that he probably could go faster, but he doesn't because his quirk doesn't come with brakes. But upon hearing this, KD gives him some motorcycling gloves to give him some protection and make him more confident. Now, just like our students got their hero names, it's time for Koichi to stop calling himself the Gentleman because no one is going to take him seriously like that. So after some prodding, eventually Koichi decides to name himself the Crawler, a fitting name given how he uses his quirk, but oh Koichi, you naive bastard. Little did you know how many people would struggle to pronounce that name from this point on. From the Hauler to the Cruller, it's one of my favorite gags in the series, especially because Koichi thinks that this name is mysterious and shrouded in the sense of danger. Come on, get real. So from here, Koichi runs into our 2 fake X-Men again and ends up with our main trio of vigilantes going up against a pretty large rampaging quirk user. Are you seeing a pattern? This is where we get the introduction of Trigger, and unlike how it happened in the manga, this is after it's been featured in My Hero Academia Season 4 and even once in the movies. Because believe it or not, this quirk-enhancing serum was actually first introduced right here at this moment of Vigilantes. Now, while this chapter does have an All Might and Deku cameo, which we'll probably actually see in the anime, eventually we'll see them take this villain down and give some further exposition on the threats and stakes of the series. But instead of the episode ending where the chapter does, I actually think it'll go a little into chapter 4, where we see Koichi going home and seeing Knuckle Duster's face for the first time as the old man eats his food, since that's just a fun place to end an episode. Now, so far, the pace seems kind of slow. We're covering a little over a chapter per episode, but keep in mind some of those early Vigilante chapters are 35 pages long, so it's roughly the size of 2 average Horikoshi chapters, which fits way more with what you'd expect an episode of the anime to cover, especially as they take a little time to flesh out the world and the characters you're just getting to meet. From here in episode 4, I'm expecting things to speed up a bit as Tsukauchi finally makes his appearance looking into all these vigilante sightings that have been happening lately, since he's a cop and of course, it's illegal. Too bad for him that he's not at Koichi's house, because all 3 of our main characters will be there revealing their true identities to each other, which means it's also a good time to get more backstory for our main character, as we see how he kind of failed to make friends during his college years after people thought that he tried to lure a woman back to an abandoned building, but it was honestly just a bad misunderstanding since Koichi's apartment is on top of that rundown building and he was just trying to hang out with his new friends in the first place. From here, while Oguro, that's Knuckle Duster by the way, lays around Koichi's apartment, we see Popstep going out to do a performance, since of course she really is a local pop star. She actually draws a pretty big crowd, and from what I've heard, they're gonna go pretty hard for her songs in the anime. But eventually this leads to one of her parasocial fans being so desperate for a handshake that he injects himself with Trigger, turning himself into some weird sort of serpent-like creature. Following this, he's taken down by KD and Koichi using Flower, but I actually think this is an opportunity for them to go beyond this chapter, as in the next chapter not only do we see this guy get interrogated about where he got the trigger, but we see Tsukauchi tailing him while Koichi and Popstep go out and are suddenly spotted by the Queen Bee herself, Tamao. This is a good place for this episode to end, bringing us a decent chunk into chapter 5. So from here in chapter 6, I think we'll continue on with Tamao's backstory as she proceeds to release her bees and attack the city by injecting numerous people with her bees and causing their quirks to rampage. Here is where we'll actually see a lot of characters we recognize taking notice, as heroes like Endeavor, Genus, Midnight, and Aizawa all arrive on the scene and start beating the hell out of these poor people. All Might even gets in on the fun, bashing the head in of some poor guy who grew really large and didn't even seem like he got to do anything. This sort of paints our heroes in a slightly different light than usual. I mean, yeah, My Hero Academia is also critical of the heroes for overdoing it against the villains, since the villains tend to just need help more often than not. But you can't get much more direct than this. These people had no control over themselves, and the heroes showed up and just started aura farming all over the place. Now, while all of this is happening, Knuckle Duster runs off, spotting one of the bees and following it as he freaks out, and no one else knows that he's actually tied into this way more than they can imagine. From here, I think the episode will continue with them taking down 3 strange perverts who really give Koichi a bad name, since their quirks are very similar to his. But it's hard for Koichi to ignore the fact that KD is behaving differently ever since the bee incident. So he asks him about it during a training session, and this only makes things worse, as KD knocks Koichi around and leaves the rooftop. On the side, we see Tamao once again stirring up some drama as she creates a new villain that goes up against our crew in what I never realized up until now was a nod to All Might vs. Inomu in Season 1. And that actually came at the end of My Hero Academia Season 1, so that's what it lets you know how things are starting to speed up in Koichi's life in relation to where Deku was at roughly at the same point in his journey. Now, I like the idea of this episode ending on this fight, so that's what I'm gonna say. As in episode 7, halfway through the season now, we might begin at the very end of chapter 6, where Tamao is convincing another person to come with her, where she'll turn them into a villain. But after the opening, we'll likely pick up at Might Tower, a massive tower in Japan that we never actually saw in the main series, but this is All Might's hero agency, and of course it's one of the most impressive in the world, as it literally has a giant globe sitting on top of it like the Daily Planet or something. Tsukauchi tries to visit our hero, but he finds out All Might is out in Hokkaido, where we see some baddies, 2 absolute stallions, trying to take over a farm along with some fat guy, as All Might stops him and makes his way back to his headquarters with tons of dairy products in hand, but no milk. Here is where we'll actually see the moment that All Might and Tsukauchi met for the very first time, as Tsukauchi has to find somebody here to talk to so we can relay a message, and he comes across Toshinori Yagi, the one man people can rely on to get those messages to All Might, since of course he is All Might, but Tsukauchi still doesn't know that. After having a talk where All Might can't stay seated since there's so many things going on in the city, Tsukauchi eventually pieces it together and promises to keep All Might's secret. Now, this is a bonus chapter of the manga, so they might skip it entirely, but I think that it'd be a shame not to cover this or at least the next bonus chapter, where we see all of our notable heroes gathered up talking about everything from UA to the rise of recent vigilantes, but it's hard to tell. If I had to guess, maybe we'll get a way quicker version of these events because it does sort of break up the pace of the series a bit, but either way, for the sake of being extremely safe with this prediction, let's assume they skip that and actually pick up in Chapter 7, where we see Ingenium being deployed from the back of a truck as he chases down a villain on the highway, thinking that he can get away. Since Tensei is a loser, of course he fails to capture this guy and gets injured in the process, but eventually Koichi runs into him on a morning run as he's actually saved by Tensei while sliding too fast. Here, Tensei jokes that Koichi's quirk is actually really versatile, since he can propel himself in whatever direction he wants along the surface that he chooses, and he can even do spins, unlike Tensei's little brother Ida, who can barely manage turning away from a tree before he smacks right into it. This ends up being a really fruitful conversation for Koichi, as Tensei teaches him to create his own brakes with his quirk, allowing Koichi to really rev up his speed and make really tight, precise maneuvers now. Realizing this, Tensei actually invites Koichi to work at his hero agency as a sidekick, but tells Koichi of course that he has to finish hero school first, since that's just the law. However, even if he can't get his hero license at school, just joining the agency and being a support member will slowly give him the qualification he needs to be a hero. The episode should continue with Ingenium trying to capture a reckless driver again, as Koichi and the crew end up being the ones to resolve this incident, and we see Tensei meeting with Koichi again to try and thank him for catching the villain, while Koichi acts like he doesn't know what Tensei is talking about. Now, of course, there's another bonus chapter that comes after this, but assuming that they aren't going to cover those and that we're sticking with the main chapter content, I think this episode should be completely capable of bringing us to the end of Chapter 8, with Kazuo wearing the All Might jacket she got from Koichi forever ago after saving her and not realizing. From here, we're finally out of the 35-page chapters. Now, in episode 8, I expect us to pick up on the events of Chapter 9, with one of the villains the gang already captured rampaging once more, since you aren't officially a villain until you act out a few times, likely to give people who have a little mistake here or there some leeway. Off on the side, we'll see Tamao trying to keep track of the different substances she's pouring into her victims. However, that's when we'll cut back to Koichi struggling against this villain and being saved by the vigilante, Stendhal. This is really cool because of course this is the hero killer Stain, back before he became a villain and was still trying to be a hero in his own way. Stendhal saves Koichi and makes a flashy exit, earning himself a fan, and from here on we'll meet Soga again since he's actually trying to meet up with our vigilantes, but since he's been so awful to them ever since they met him, Kazuo makes him leave off, as in a dark alley we watch Stendhal covering up the villain from earlier, since of course he's not afraid to drop a few bodies in the name of his justice. Tamao gets really excited by this as she watches in the background, and of course Stain's next target is Soga, making our plot really start to heat up. This is the perfect opportunity for them to adapt bonus chapter 9.5, since this chapter really fleshes out Stendhal's character in Vigilantes, allowing us to follow him on an entire mission against some thugs, and he even uses his quirk here, so it'll be a cool reveal if that's the direction they go. Regardless, that ends off with Tamao giving Stendhal his list of targets, showing how she's really controlling things in the background, and that's where we'll go into chapter 10. This chapter begins with us seeing Soga's friends in the hospital after their quirks rampage earlier in the story, showing us that these guys are losers, but they're also just a bit misguided. This continues when Tamao runs into Soga in an alley and gives him a tip about a vigilante going around killing villains, warning him that he should take care of this guy because his friends are in danger. But when she tries to offer him Trigger to give him a chance, Soga actually turns it down, breaking the vials in her care because he saw the effects that it had on his buddies. This makes Tamao angry, forcing her to use her bees to inject Soga with a giant dose of Trigger and causing him to turn into a monster in the middle of town, and that's where I think the episode should end. That means that in episode 9, we should pick up on Koichi hearing Soga's screams, immediately heading to his location and finding him there ready to fight Stendhal. When Stendhal tells Koichi to back off because he's there to put this thing down, Koichi says, yeah, this guy is kind of a villain, but I know him, so at least let me try to solve this by talking first, but he's immediately interrupted by the sound of a sword swinging as Stendhal cuts Soga right across the chest, really trying to end him. Koichi grabs Soga, trying to run away, but Stendhal begins attacking both of them, using his quirk to freeze Koichi, who he says is no better than a villain at this point since he's helping them. Unluckily for Stain, this is the moment his life changes because right on time, Knuckle Duster shows up to save his boys, leading to a one-on-one fight between the two where Knuckle Duster tells the vigilante not to cross the line and bashes Stendhal's face in the moment he does. This hurts extra because of course Stendhal is wearing a glass mask for some reason, so this punch really injures his nose and completely changes his face. However, beyond that, because of this interaction with Knuckle Duster, it completely changes Stendhal's mindset as he ends up escaping, thanking KD for his teachings tonight, showing us that this moment is the real birth of Stain. This continues as Stain goes back home, cutting the rest of his mangled nose off and throwing a dagger at Tamao when she tries to make a joke out of the situation. And we should reach the halfway point of the episode of Stain making his exit out of the series, but there's more to come. This is where I think we'll be introduced to Makoto, Tsukauchi's sister, who we meet in chapter 11, as her and Koichi share a few scenes before she ends up at his apartment debating the effect that Vigilantes have on the hero system. Eventually, this ends with Makoto going back home and having a similar debate with Tsukauchi, and honestly, this is kind of a boring place for this episode to end, but one of these episodes has to be more of an in-between episode, and we do get a full few chapters of this Koichi-Makoto plotline, so it's to be expected. In episode 10, I think we'll spend a little time covering the events of chapter 13, as Makoto tries to use her quirk to figure out if Koichi is actually a vigilante or not, but I can't see us taking that long to move on to the events of chapter 14 that introduce Captain Celebrity, America's #1 hero at this time. We'll see Cap saving people from all sorts of incidents, as Koichi and Popstep share how they just really don't like this guy. However, the majority of the episode should feature him, as the following chapter, chapter 15, also revolves around Captain Celebrity and Koichi saving someone together, and Makoto even makes an appearance here as well. This brings us to episode 11, and if you're wondering why I blazed through episode 10 so quickly, it's because I'm realizing that there's only 3 episodes left and we have a lot of material left to cover. So clearly they're gonna cut out way more than I thought they would from those earlier episodes, but I'm starting to see a good path for how things will continue. You see, in episode 11, we've really got to start getting into some of the Queen Bee arc content, and that begins with Koichi's mom visiting Japan, where we'll see her meeting with his new friends and telling a few stories about his childhood, before eventually the group takes a trip and gets caught up in another Tamao-fueled crisis, given that she turned a cat into a quirk user who takes over the bus Koichi and his family are on and takes it for a ride. This is where the plot will continue to come together, as Ingenium appears once again, saving this bus from going off of a broken bridge by evacuating everyone onto his transport bus thanks to the help of his new sidekick, Enigma, which is this weird, large, blobby sort of creature with long arms. Before they can get everyone off of the bus, Tamao injects the cat with another dose of trigger, causing Koichi to suit up and join Ingenium on this mission as they work together. But we see a pretty serious moment between Koichi and his mom, where his mom repeatedly smacks him, trying to get Koichi to sit back with the rest of the civilians, because he's not a hero, he's just a normal kid. Koichi tells her that there's no time for that, as she realizes something is different about him, allowing Koichi to finally catch up to the bus and save Makoto by flying for the very first time. Now, Koichi's mom explains that he used to fly around all the time when he was a baby, but she would give him a little slap, and eventually this sort of created a mental block that made it so Koichi only thought of his quirk as one that slides, given that he couldn't even remember being able to fly with it at all. Now, while this is a lot of content, I think it'd be nice to wrap all of this up in the same episode, and since Koichi is getting some time for his family to shine, we should also finally get a look at Knuckle Duster's family, because this is where I'd put the scene of him visiting his wife in the hospital. In episode 12, I think we pick up on the events of chapter 19, where we get a deeper look at Knuckle Duster's life as we learn more about his wife's condition, and Soga goes off on his own investigation, trying to find the B quirk user. These plotlines end up colliding as we realize that Tamao is actually Knuckle Duster's daughter, and we get some scenes from the two of them separately, getting ready for the conflict we've been building towards all season. While this is going on, we'll see Popstep planning her next show along with Koichi and all their new friends, but in the background, Tamao is planning on attacking this show with her quirk, and that's probably not going to go the way she plans, because by the end of chapter 20, we see Knuckle Duster has finally tracked her down without realizing. From here, we should see the entirety of chapter 21 getting adapted, with Captain Celebrity defeating a giant villain, before we see Tamao has actually locked up one of Soga's friends from earlier in the story, injecting him with so much trigger that he's basically a mindless weapon just like a Nomu now. Now, the episode could end here, but honestly I'd include the following section where Aizawa runs into this monster the night of the concert, while Knuckle Duster approaches his daughter on a nearby rooftop. This is the perfect lead up into episode 13, our final episode of the season. In episode 13, I think we'll pick up on the beginning of chapter 23, with Knuckle Duster telling his daughter she will be coming home since mom is waiting, as the two of them begin the fight. This continues on with Popstep's concert taking place in the background, as with that as the backdrop, we see KD chasing his daughter around the area. This battle is filled with tense moments, flashbacks, and cuts to Popstep's performance should give us some really good background music for some of these moments. But eventually, after it looks like Tamao has actually won, we'll see KD getting back up to finish this fight with all sorts of memories flashing in his mind. After defeating her, things still aren't over though, as he tries to remove the Queen Bee Quirk user from her body so he can actually have his daughter back. On top of the fact that he actually has to restart her heart since he needed to stop it to save her in the first place. With all of this going on, we wrap things up with Aizawa letting Popstep's biggest fan hear the finale of her concert, despite the fact that he's weirdly transformed. And this brings us to our teaser for season 2, as a strange man in the crowd manages to capture the final living quirk enhancing bee, taking it with him back to wherever he comes from, walking mysteriously off into the night, as fans of the manga know he'll be back to cause some trouble. Now here I think we'll actually skip around a little, showing different scenes that will be good send-offs to our characters for a while, like Knuckle Duster going to the hospital to see his daughter, and Koichi and Popstep setting up a board in their room with the memories of everything that happened over these last few days, as Koichi narrates to us telling us that the clock keeps ticking and his battle has barely even begun. So with that said, I think My Hero Academia Vigilantes Season 1 is gonna cover 28 chapters of content, going from the start of the manga to the end of the Queen Bee arc in chapter 28, setting up for Season 2 where we'll see the return of Rokuro, the Speed Demon, and giving us a pretty good look at what this series has to offer before we start getting into some of the main series character backstories like Aizawa and Shirakumo. It's been a while since I made a video like this, but I kinda wanna do more videos for this season of Vigilantes, so let me know if you'd be interested, because if not, I'm happy to go back into my shorts hole. It's comfy over there. Regardless, what do you think of my predictions for the chapter count this season? And if you're watching in the future, was I right or was I wrong? Hit that sub button and like the video if you enjoyed it or if I was right. I play games on my side channel, Vocal Pineapple XL, and this week we've been playing a lot of Bleach Rebirth of Souls and a few other games. So I'd love it if you can go check me out on there and give me some love. I'm also on TikTok, Instagram, and Twitter at Vocal Pineapple on all platforms. So I'll see you soon, and next time let's talk about the Patreon, where you can watch me react to every episode of this season.